Hello, everybody. Welcome to Zone Defense. Be sure to follow us on Spotify at Zone Defense Podcast, on Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Zone Defense Podcast, and be sure to ring that bell to get post notifications. Also, hit that like button and drop a comment down below and let us know your thoughts on today's topic. Today, Chris and I will be doing another edition of the Zone Defense Basketball Hour. How's it going, Chris?
It's going good, Drew. You know, a lot of news out of the NBA that we need to get into. I'm excited to talk about it this week. Just another really interesting week of the NBA, which so far has been extremely fun to watch season. I don't know about you, but I'm just going to ask you really quick. What's been your favorite team to watch? You know, I know we both have League Pass this year for the first time. What's been your favorite team that you didn't expect to watch in the on League Pass this year?
That I didn't expect to watch.
Or I mean, that you didn't expect to be entertained by, I would say.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are saying the Kings, but I'm a big De'Aaron Fox fan, so I've always watched the Kings, even when they're not great to watch. I would have to say maybe the Rockets are a sneaky fun team to watch, or the Cavs or the Hornets too. Those are the teams that I would say that I was not anticipating watching, but I've actually been pretty compelled to watch their games. The Pacers too would definitely be in there, but they've been a little bit haven't been as good as of late. But those are all honorable mentions. The top of the top, though, it's got to be the San Antonio Spurs. We trashed them in our preview episode about how they're not going to be fun to watch, but they are very, very fun to watch. I think I said last week, DeJounte Murray's rebound highlights are just some of the funnest things on NBA you can watch, where he just is like, his wingspan is just insane, and he's just reaching up. It's fun to watch. So, yeah, the Spurs, Spurs are probably my number one team, but those other teams I mentioned are also good. But what about you?
Yeah, I would say the Hornets are my top team as well. A lot of
Yeah,
those obviously fun teams to watch. The Knicks, another team
yeah,
that I like watching because of their great defense. But I would say the Hornets have been the most. You know, I would say they've been a really surprising team this year. You know, they've been very competitive. LaMelo Ball has come into his own. Terry Rozier's having a really good season, especially, and then
yeah,
Gordon Hayward has been an obvious all-star candidate to me. He's been
yeah,
fantastic this year, and they've got a lot of nice role players on their team as well that have come and make an impact. They're a really fun team to watch. They play pretty scrappy defensively. They can shoot
yeah.
the ball. They can score at a pretty high rate. And there's a lot of, I mean, when you have Miles Bridges catching lobs from LaMelo Ball, there's going to be a lot of highlights of those too. Both really good at their craft. So I think they're definitely a team that I enjoy watching. And they're up there for me, and the Spurs another good call. But yeah,
Yeah,
we can get into it now if you want.
well, actually, the Hornets were going to be one of my points about how
Wow.
I was impressed with how they were playing and how entertaining they were. So we just knocked that off out the bat. Fortunately, I got three other things. But yeah, they're 10-13 right now. To talk about a little bit more about their record, they lost two in a row, but they're right in the thick of that Eastern Conference playoff race. The only big concern for them is the Heat. The Raptors have actually passed them because they've played a lot better as of late, especially Pascal Siakam's looked better. But the Heat are still behind the Hornets. So that's a little concerning. Maybe the Heat will leapfrog them once they get their guys back. But yeah, I just wanted to echo all the points you made. The Hornets are fun to watch, and they're also a good team. And I think once LaMelo Ball starts getting a little, we saw him just the other night. He had 35 points, I think it was. He's looking really good.
Yeah.
He seems to be getting better and better. And I think once he gets a little bit more minutes, I think they have another level they could reach. Same with PJ Washington, who's been banged up here as of late as well. So, yeah, thank you for knocking out one of my points here real quick.
I got you.
I'll jump into my first point, which honestly, it's something that neither of us enjoy talking about. I don't think anybody enjoys talking about it. I think hopefully, if things go according to plan here these next few months, it's a storyline we will no longer have to talk about forever. But the big storyline, we got to talk about it, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts about it. But it's got to be the All-Star game and the COVID safety protocols, all that. I mean, it's dominated NBA headlines here all week. I know it's not a fun headline to talk about, but like I said, I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. But so for those that maybe, I'll give a brief overview real quick that maybe aren't aware. The All-Star game originally wasn't going to happen. Then the NBA came out a couple days ago and said it is going to happen. It's going to be in Atlanta in late March, I believe. And there's still, I don't think it's confirmed yet, but most likely there will be a dunk contest and a three-point contest as well, similar to like an regular All-Star Saturday night. And this has been met with a lot of controversy, a lot of vitriol from NBA fans and media and fellow players. The first one that came out was De'Aaron Fox, which no offense to De'Aaron Fox, but it's like I love him, like I said, one of my favorite players, but he's not a superstar. And when he said, "Yeah, I don't think it's right. I don't think it makes a lot of sense," it was like whatever. But now you got guys like superstars, like LeBron, some of the biggest athletes, not only in the NBA but in the world, like LeBron, Giannis. I think James Harden's come out and said some stuff about
Kawhi.
how Kawhi, Kawhi too, especially because he doesn't talk about anything. So when
Well,
he's talking, it's got to be a big deal. So. I'll start off with my opinion on it. I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense, just because if you look at some of the other protocols and everything. I mean, guys, you can't dap people up, you can't swap jerseys, you can't do anything like that. And now the NBA, but they're like, hey, you guys can combine and play in an all-star game. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It doesn't really line up with the protocols. I mean, I'm still going to watch it. Hopefully it's an entertaining game to watch. And it's hard to make a really big decisive decision on it just because we don't know the financials. It seems like it's most likely a financial decision because they get that TV revenue. Atlanta is letting fans in, so they'll get at least some gate money. And NBA, I know they're losing money. I don't know how much. And I guess it's enough to it's going to sound pretty drastic, but I think it's accurate as to risk the health of not only the different players, but also the rest of the season. I mean, it'd be different if we were in a bubble. It'd be different if, by some grace of God, COVID hadn't impacted the NBA season. But you look across the league. I mean, the Wizards were out for 2 weeks. The Grizzlies were out for 2 weeks. They recently just came back. I think now every team is playing, which is like for the first time since the very beginning of the season, which is awesome. But there's still teams who've had to cancel certain games: the Pistons, the Celtics, the Heat. I think the Suns had to cancel a couple of games as well. And everyone's got some guys on the COVID list, but it seems like everyone's playing, at least playing right now. So from a pure basketball standpoint, I just don't really get why the NBA would do this and risk potentially ruining the rest of the season, because we've seen with other sports like baseball or like football who just did it with the Pro Bowl. They're not hosting the All-Star games because of the risks involved. So I have a few other takes real quick, but I'll let you take the floor here and then I can conclude it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it's dumb to play the game. Totally just stupid. I think you're endangering both. Okay, so the players are supposed to have, a 5-day break. That's what they were told before the season.
Exactly,
There wasn't supposed to be an all-star game. Now they're having the all-star game. I don't know what you would expect. I mean, I'm sure they were really looking forward to just winding down for a few days.
Yeah.
It's been frankly a tough. I mean, some of these teams are playing 5 games in an individual week. They got 2 different back-to-backs in 1 week. I mean, it's a lot of games to be played, and it takes a lot of toll on the body because it's a little bit more condensed schedule, especially because they're trying to cram some of these games in before this all-star break now. But I really just don't get it. I mean, there's fans there. You're bringing the best player from each team. What if there's a COVID outbreak in that room? I mean, it could ruin the entire league, potentially cancel the season if say 10 players from that game were to get it or something, or be placed on the COVID list, or staff members and stuff. You could be looking at a league-wide emergency if this was to break out in a certain way. I mean, it's possible that there's a small chance that they get it done without any tests, but I think that risk, I mean, I know, like you said, there's a financial gain to the All-Star game, but I just don't understand it, man. It doesn't make any sense. I think the risks far outweigh any gain financially, because I mean, would you rather play this game and make some money, or have the entire season season get canceled and miss out on all that money, or miss out on this game with the extra money, or play the rest of the season, play the playoffs? And it's been going, for the most part, I wouldn't say smoothly, but I mean, they've been at least able to handle any potential problems, and they've done, in my opinion, a pretty good job with it so far.
Yeah.
So, but I think this is absolutely ignorant. This is something that the NFL would do. This is something that the MLB
They did it.
would
That's
do.
what I'm saying.
But they didn't do it.
Yeah.
And now the NBA is normally the organization that I think Adam Silver's a good commissioner. I think he's the best out of all the main sports, and I think they do a good job with it. But I think this is one of the first really bad decisions he's made since the league was, postponed last season. I think this is one of the worst decisions they've made so far.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't really know how to say this without just being blunt, but the NBA, speaking about the league and the commissioner's office and all that, they have this air about themselves that they think they're better than all the other leagues, that they're the best league, and they know what's right and they do the right thing every time, and blah blah blah. And this, as you said, is clearly the wrong move in my opinion. And you look at some of the leagues that get crapped on all the time, with the NFL and the MLB, they didn't even do this, which is like, I mean, this is right up Rob Manfred's alley to have an All-Star game, and he even was like, "Yeah, no, we're good, full steam ahead. Yeah, we might have some outbreaks, but we got to get the most important thing is finishing the season, as you said, and getting into the playoffs and crowning a champion. Who gives a crap about an All-Star game?" And the other thing about it is the players have basically come out and said, "Yeah, I'm basically not even going to play, so it's going to be a brutal game to watch." So yeah, they're going to get some TV revenue, but the ratings are probably going to be absolute crap. The quality of basketball is not going to be good, and on top of that, you risk a possible outbreak that ends the rest of the season. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think the NBA is, like I said, they do a lot of things right, in terms of like I don't know how this will impact like the owners and players relationships, but at least before this incident, they haven't had a really positive relationship, especially in comparison to other sports. They market their players the best way. I think if you talk about casual fans, most all casual fans, at least the ones that I know, are very familiar with the NBA, but in other leagues, like for example, baseball, Mike Trout's the equivalent of LeBron James, and most casual fans don't even know who Mike Trout is. But with NBA, they've done a great job marketing their players. They've done a really good job in all those areas as well. And this is really the first severe black eye that I think they've gotten not just since the shutdown, but I think in the entire Adam Silver regime. And it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why you'd risk it. And I don't even, because I think because the Players Association had to agree with this.
I don't know why they did.
Yeah, I don't know how they did either, because I'll be honest, I thought LeBron was the Players Association for the most part. And he even came out. He's one of the first people that came out and said, "This is dumb." He didn't say it, but I'm paraphrasing, of course. So this doesn't make a lot of sense. And then to add even more fuel to the fire, last night, I don't know if you saw with Kevin Durant in the Nets Raptors game, he couldn't play because of COVID safety protocols. Then he could play, so then he did play, and then they took him out because of COVID safety protocols. And he's just like, "What the heck is going on?" I think he tweeted, "Free me." So now you got people, and yeah, as you said, I think the NBA did a great job with the bubble, and so far they've done a great job with COVID. But now it's like, okay, you got this All-Star game, that's one black guy. Now you got this other black guy with one of the superstars who couldn't play, and then could play, so he did play, and then he didn't play, and now he's going to be out for a few games. It's like, what are we doing? And it's just, now the people who are like, why are we having an All-Star game, are even louder, because if you can't even handle one COVID safety protocol player who's a superstar, how are you going to handle what? I think it's 20 or 22 people that are in the league. So that's at least my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely agree with all that you're saying here. I think we're on the same page. I think this is going to be the majority opinion. I don't think the game is. I personally might not even watch the game because I don't think it's going to be that entertaining. It's not going to be like last season. Last season was fantastic. Most All-Star games are pretty boring to watch, in my opinion. I like the events, so I might watch those. But I probably, if I'm busy, I'm probably not going to make time for the All-Star game. I believe it's actually on my birthday, which is kind of funny enough. But Sunday, March 7th.
Yeah, I think it's, if as sad as it sounds, the fact that people are what's supposed to be in late March, so hopefully things are maybe a little bit more open by then. But people are still going to be at their homes for the most part, especially because the weather, at least here in Michigan, will still not be great. So people will probably still watch it, but the level of basketball is going to be absolute crap. I'll be honest.
Right, most likely. Yeah, I agree with that. I think we'll have to see how it ends up shaping up if they end up continue to go through. I think they will end up going through with it, but I think there's going to be players that opt out despite maybe some financial penalty, and some players that continue to voice their opinion. A lot of players that don't try. I think you're going to see a lot of all that. I think they're going to be mostly in unison. Even some of the first timers and guys that aren't there that much. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. Again, a topic I didn't really want to talk about that much, but hopefully you have at least a more positive or more basketball-centric topic for your first point.
Yeah, I mean, I had the All-Star game down. I figured this was going to be something we both brought up and we're able to talk about. But yeah, I'll get into my next point. It's just a couple teams that I'm a little bit worried about. I know we talked about the Raptors early in the season. They've kind of turned things around. It's a few different teams, though, that have gotten off to really slow starts that I'm actually a little bit worried about. And I'll just preface this by saying I am worried about all three of these teams, and one of them happens to be one of the teams I proclaim could be a finals contender, but their offense has just been absolutely trash this year. It's the Dallas Mavericks. Kristaps doesn't look like the same player he was. Josh Richardson hasn't been great. I mean, Luka hasn't been fantastic on the defensive side of the ball despite his offensive heroics for this team. I mean, they have the lowest 3-point percentage in the league, and if that doesn't change soon, this team's going to run into some problems because their defense has regressed mightily since I said that. It was like I believe in top 5 in defensive rating when I was talking about them potentially making a run this season, but their offense has continued to struggle and their defense has not been quite at the same level either. So I think it's definitely a team to be worried about. Another team would be, I mean, clearly the Miami Heat have had their struggles. I mean, they're 13th right now at 8-14. They haven't looked great. Last night they had a pretty nice win. They're finally, they have no excuses. They need to go on a win streak now. They don't have anyone on the COVID list. They don't have anyone injured anymore. Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, they need to basically backpack this team to second half of the East playoff spot because I think it's pretty much out of question that they're going to be a top 4 seed now. Maybe they can go on a crazy run and get on it, but I mean they're considerably far back from some of those teams. So I think they're definitely a team to be worried about. And then lastly, I'll let you can address any or all of these teams. The New Orleans Pelicans. And this is a team that I'm a little bit less worried about because they've actually been playing extremely well the last couple of games. Their defense has really picked up the intensity. I mean, you saw they were able to take down the Pacers last night in a really good game, despite, I mean, they basically just locked up Sabonis the entire game, only went 3 for 13. I think Zion's been a big part of that. He's been playing a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball. I've stated some frustrations with him this season, not on the podcast, just in general, that he hasn't been playing a lick of defense. And, you know, he obviously is so gifted offensively, but as an all-around player has not been that great and has been very underwhelming this year. But he's been a lot better on the defensive side of the ball the last couple of games, been a lot more active, been a really good rim protector, which is definitely partly what they need him for, with his offense as well included. But I think all three of these teams are in some trouble of missing the playoffs potentially. I think the Pels, for what they are, and they weren't really expected to be some insanely good team this year, I think they're kind of starting to find their way. The other two teams, though, have severely underperformed based on their early season expectations. But yeah, any of these teams you want to get into, go ahead before you jump into your next point.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much covered all the teams there, and I agree with most of your points. The Pelicans, they're just inconsistent. It is promising, though, because I think on paper, at least, they have the most talent, I want to say. Just the fit isn't great. But as you mentioned, they have been playing better as of late. It seemed, and most of their losses at the beginning of the year, like they were in most of those games. They just their late game execution was just terrible. As you said, Zion and the whole team. I know we like to point out Zion because his defensive flaws, because he's so gifted on the offensive end, are most prevalent. But the whole team as a whole wasn't playing great defensively, and now they've really seemed to pick up the pace. I think. I mean, we talked about, I think last week, a lot of people have been talking about how the New Orleans has been disappointing. A lot of podcasts, a lot of different NBA shows, and I think New Orleans might have just heard that and they're like, okay, let's go. So I like them. It's just the West is so tough, and look at the teams above them at the moment. They're currently only 2 games out of the play-in tournament spot. Those teams ahead of them, the Kings, they've been playing good basketball as of late. It's hard to say, like, are they going to be a good team or are they going to be a bad team because they're so inconsistent? But as of late, they've looked really good. Had a nice one against the Celtics the other night. Rockets, Grizzlies, Spurs. I mean, I think the Pelicans could potentially overthrow any of those teams, but then maybe even the Warriors. And above that, I don't really see them getting more. I think their ceiling right now, at least this year, is the play-in tournament. But overall, I think they need to make some more moves, maybe at the deadline, maybe in the offseason for the long-term growth of this team. But at least for right now, this year, I'm not entirely worried about them. And I think I would say the same thing for the Heat. It hasn't been like instantly Jimmy Butler's back in the lineup and they're winning every night by 30 points. It hasn't been like that. But they have looked at least a little better. They had a brutal loss against the Wizards the other night. Didn't look great. But I think as they get more of their guys back, as they get more, as they get healthier, as they get more accustomed to each other. I mean, this is a team that made the finals just a year ago. And actually just a few months ago, because the season ended only a few months ago. And I think just looking at the rest of the teams in the weak Eastern Conference, I mean, you mentioned it, they have to a brutal start, but they're only a game and a half out of the play-in spot. I'm looking at the teams, the Bulls, the Magic, the Hornets. As much as I love the Hornets, the Cavs, as much as I love the Cavs, the Knicks, I like the Heat better than any of those teams.
Yeah.
So even though on paper it doesn't look great, and I would love if they made a Bradley Beal move, even though it sounds like Beal's probably going to stay in Washington, at least as of this week's reports. I still think they have the talent enough to at least make the play-in tournament, maybe even sneak into the 6th seed, which is currently held by the Atlanta Hawks.
Yeah.
So I said all of that set up just to say I'm most concerned about the Mavericks because I mean Luka's Luka. Yeah, he needs to improve defensively, but he's still a top 5 player in the NBA. He's going to be a top 5 player in the NBA for the foreseeable future. Just around him, there is not a lot. I mean, Maxi Kleber, he's okay, he's good. Josh Richardson has not played well. Tim Hardaway Jr., Trey Burke, Michigan alums look decent. But they're more role players. You don't want them being your 3rd or 4th options on your team. Isn't great. And it really just comes out to Kristaps Porzingis. I am completely out on Kristaps Porzingis. We did the stock game last week. I would sell Kristaps Porzingis because I think he is done. I mean, look at the injuries with 7-footers. It does not get better with age. He's still relatively young, but it's just based on history, based on medicals, the seventh footers will keep getting injured, and he just cannot stay on the floor. And it seems like now is severely limited him. And I don't think he's going to be the number 2. He's not going to be the number 2 option for Luka. I don't think he can be. And again, I go back like a couple years ago. Obviously, it was before we started doing this show. The Porzingis got traded from the Knicks to the Mavs. Everybody clowned that trade. Are you kidding me? This is garbage. Now the Knicks are looking like they look like geniuses. They got off his money. Yeah, they didn't get Kevin Durant, which was the big motivator in that trade, but they got off his cash. They don't deal with his injury issues, and now they're in kind of a better. I don't want to say a better spot because they don't have Luka Doncic, obviously, but they got picks. They're a decent team this year. I think they're a better team, at least as of right now, than the Mavericks so far in the regular season. And I think the Mavs. I know we all were like, "Oh, the Knicks lost that trade." I think the Mavericks might have lost that trade, quite frankly. And I think if you're the Mavericks, you got to find a team who's maybe like, because Porzingis is a name, so maybe you can put some butts in the seats if you got a team like the Pistons a few years ago with Blake Griffin, right? He was on the decline, very similar, but the Pistons are like, "Hey, we need to get butts in seats, so let's get Blake Griffin because he's a big name." You like when I say butts in seats? So I think the same thing would happen with Porzingis. I think some team, maybe a Charlotte Hornets, maybe Michael Jordan's like, "Hey, let's get Kristaps." Maybe, I swear to God, if the Pistons do that again, I would get really frustrated, but maybe the Pistons will do it again. I think the Mavs got to find a desperate team and be like, "Hey, here's Kristaps. Give us some picks. Maybe if you can get a young star, I think maybe Bradley Beal for Kristaps was a deal I saw thrown around. Which I think you'd have to add some more stuff if you're the Mavericks, obviously. But maybe the Wizards, another desperate team that maybe if they lose Beal, they still want to be relevant. And I think Kristaps would at least bring some intrigue to their team. So overall, I think the Mavericks are the team I'm most worried about right now. And I think they got to get rid of Kristaps if they want to build the best team around Luka, or else we might be seeing another Bradley Beal situation where there's one guy and nothing else around him. So, yeah.
I mean, yeah, before I'll let you jump into your next point in a second. I'm just gonna make a point about Kristaps. Like, I somewhat agree and disagree with you. I think he still has a lot of talent. Clearly, still a really skilled player. Coming back from injury, you got to give him some time. I mean, look at guys like Oladipo. It took him basically a full year to get back to full health. So I think it's not totally, fair to write him off. But at the same time, he's probably going to continue to get injured.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's tough to predict injuries, but at the same time, it's a lot easier to predict him getting injured than say any other player in the league, because he's so. I mean, he's super tall. He's on the skinnier side as well. He still has offensive skill. He's starting to pick it up a little bit on the offensive end of the floor. At least last game he was hot shooting from 3, but he's been absolutely assaulted on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, you look at last year in the bubble. I remember. I mean, this is a little bit of a homer thing, but watching Damian Lillard blow by him every single time in a 61 point, I felt like half of them were him just blowing by Kristaps for an easy layup. I feel like I'm seeing more of the same this season with him just really struggling to get back on the defensive side of the ball. He was earlier in his career. He was fast with his feet, quick with his feet. He could maybe not contain, but do a better job against those guards, block some shots on which he's still blocking shots at a pretty high rate. But as of being a rim protector and active switching defender, I've noticed some some flaws in his game. So it's been a problem for them. It's going to continue to be a problem, but hopefully with more reps, he can pick it up because I don't think they're getting anything close to what they want in the trade for him. So I think he's there for the long haul, despite them maybe not wanting that to be true.
Yeah, and he actually was good in the bubble in terms
He
of
was
statistics.
really good offensively.
Yeah.
Defensively, I didn't think he was incredibly good, but maybe that was just the one game sample where he was getting it. I mean, a lot of players get cooked by elite point guards. It happens, but he did look a step slow there, and it has continued this season. Watching him against Curry the other day was especially tough to watch, and Oubre as well.
The thing with the bubble, though, was he was playing really well, and then he got hurt, which I think you're just going to have to deal with if you're Kristaps. But, I mean, I think the model, they're different players. I'm not saying they're the same player, but it could be Anthony Davis. I mean, that's a guy who was hurt nonstop early part of his career. And I think AD is only like 2 years older than Kristaps, but that's a guy who had a bunch of injury concerns, and he was able to figure out at least somewhat and obviously win a championship. So maybe it's there. But I know right now I'm not entirely high on Kristaps's long-term outlook. With the Mavericks and also just for his career as a whole, which really stinks. I think he is a really gifted player. But I'll jump into my next topic. I was not intending on just sticking completely on the All-Star game, but I'm going to go back into the All-Star game. We're going to talk about the first fan returns of the fan vote. So they redid it. So now it's like they redid a couple years ago where it's not all entirely based on the fan vote. The media and the players, I believe, also get some sort of a vote, and then the coaches get the reserves. But I just want to hear your thoughts on the fan returns, and if there was anything that like surprised you, if there's anything that you feel like anyone got snubbed, is there anyone that's getting way overhyped? I'll start off with mine. I think Jaylen Brown is getting severely underrated. I mean, currently, at least this was a few days ago, but he's currently at almost 600,000 votes in fourth place, and he's behind Bradley Beal, who's got over 1 million, Kyrie Irving, who's got over 1 million, and James Harden, who's got over 1 million. And as much as gifted of players as Harden and Kyrie are, I think this season alone, that Jaylen Brown has been a better player, and I think he deserves to be an all-star starter. I think eventually he will get to that point simply because the coaches will vote him in, and I think Harden's going to get a little bit dinged because of what he did off the court and how he started the season in Houston. And I think Kyrie, the coaches don't like him, and he missed half the year. But that's the big snub for me. And Irving and Harden are the two guys that got a little bit overrated, I think. But was anything stand out to you?
I mean, I've noticed, Gordon Hayward, not as high as I think he should be. I think that's a guy that I really hope he at least I think he'll make the game, but I think he should be deserving a little bit more love. I think he's been absolutely incredible this year. That's really the one that stood out to me. I mean, you look at, obviously there's a lot of really good players in the NBA. It's tough. It's tough. They're razor thin difference wise in talent, but I agree with the Jaylen Brown as well. I think a lot of the front court or the back court in the East, there's a lot of really good players, but it's also tough to keep certain guys out as well. So I think there's definitely some, I think there's some good picks. There's some bad picks, just kind of like every season. I'm looking to see if there's any more. I don't really see anything. I mean, and maybe Trae Young's a little too high. I agree that, like I said, Jaylen Brown definitely too low. Other than that, I don't think it's too bad. I like the guards in the West, especially. I think are really accurate. I think Curry, Luka, Lillard should be the clear top three in there. Maybe Christian Wood deserves a little more love too, because I think he's been a better player than Zion and Wiggins, who are both already ahead of him as of right now. But other than that, I don't think it's awful. I think it's a pretty fair representation of the league.
Yeah, and I'll just read it off real quick in case people aren't know. So currently, West top 5 guards: Curry, Luka, Lillard, Ja. A little surprised because he missed a lot of time, and then Donovan Mitchell. West front court: LeBron, Jokic, Kawhi, and then the two guys right on the outside looking in right now is AD and Paul George, and then Zion's there in 6th. I think all three of those guys. Zion maybe doesn't make it, but I think AD and George are going to make it. It's just, as you said, NBA is full of good players, and LeBron, Jokic, and Kawhi I think are clearly better than AD and Paul George, at least this season. But AD and George, they're still going to make it, both having great seasons. And then East, front court: KD, Giannis, Embiid, Tatum. Jimmy Butler is really surprising. His teammate, who's in 6th, Bam Adebayo, I think he deserves to be in.
Hayward as well.
Yeah, I think he's going to be dinged a little bit just because the Heat have been bad. But if they get some more wins here, I think Bam will probably make the team. I think he made the team last year, if I'm not mistaken. He can make it again. Julius Randle's also there in 8th, and then our hometown boy Jeremy Grant from the Pistons is there in 10th. So he's probably not going to make it, but I know I voted for him just because he has been a really good player, even though the Pistons have been awful. And then last thing, East guards, I kind of already mentioned it, but you got Beal, Kyrie, Harden top 3, and then Jaylen Brown in 4th, and Zach LaVine in 5th. Colin Sexton's there in 7th, and then Derrick Rose is actually in 8th. Him and Carmelo Anthony, who's 10th in Western Conference forwards. Seems like they're always in the top 10 just because they're big names and people love them, even though they're way past their primes, but it's kind of cool to see those guys too. But it's just an interesting thing. I love all-star returns, seeing how the fans pay attention to the teams. Jaylen Brown was the big thing for me that stood out, and I wanted to make sure we talked about that. But the other ones, as you said, were pretty good. But we can jump into your next point if you want.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, it's really tough to do all-star voting because of the amount of talent in the league right now. I mean, you just continue to see stars blossom on a day-to-day basis. But one team that has been really struggling to find any consistency for the last few seasons with what you could call now, I guess, is a big 3, but it's really not even remotely close to that, is the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is the team I want to talk about next. What on earth do they do next? I mean, this is a team that is 6-16, outside of the Pistons, who have a clear direction of being awful, and their design is to be awful. I have no idea what the Timberwolves are doing. I mean, this is a team that, I mean, on paper, like I said, maybe a potentially big 3 with Karl-Anthony Towns, who's clearly a great player. D'Angelo Russell, which you know my opinions on him. I think he's trash, but some people think he's a pretty good player. And then Malik Beasley, who has been extremely good this year, averaging over 20 points a game. He's been arguably their best and most consistent player. It's not an actual big 3. People like to claim maybe it is. I don't know. This is a team that has been absolutely struggling to find any consistency. I mean, they're 6-16 this season, the clear worst team in the West. The Mavericks, unfortunately, right in front of that 9-4 team, which is also very embarrassing. But the Timberwolves they won last night against a super shorthanded Thunder team, but they took a game-winning 3 from D'Lo after a beautiful Al Horford shot. This was a game, for some reason, I found myself watching on League Pass. Ended up being a really good game, but watching the Timberwolves play basketball it's really tough to watch. I mean, Anthony Edwards, he's shown some flashes in the pan, but he's not been as consistent as some of the other rookies like LaMelo, like a Halliburton, maybe even a Wiseman, despite him being injured now. He's shown flashes, but been extremely inconsistent. I really just don't know what this team's going to do, man. I mean, if they fall out of the top 3, they don't have a first-round pick this year. The Warriors will have that pick if it's not top 3. And, I mean, you can argue they were better off with just having Andrew Wiggins in that pick. I know you can definitely not even argue. I think it's definitely true that trade was an absolute debacle for them because I think Wiggins is a better player than Russell. I think deloading, watching him play basketball, it's miserable. It makes me want to gouge my eyes out. He's one of my least favorite players in the league. But I think this team, I mean, they don't have a clear direction. I think their move's got to be, they got to trade Karl-Anthony Towns. I mean, it's come to that point. I mean, they're not going to win anything. I feel like they just need to totally tear it down. This big 3 that's here, it's not going to work. Karl-Anthony Towns has a ton of trade value right now, is a fantastic big, probably the 3rd best big in the league. Great offensive player. I think it's time to move on. I don't think they're going to win anything with this roster. I mean, I don't think you were expecting to talk about the Timberwolves today. I know producer John probably not going to be the most thrilled to hear this on the docket. What do you think this team should do? Because it's been a disaster this year.
It's just hard because, like you mentioned it there, trade Cat. That's the most obvious thing, but he's only played 4 games. So maybe, I mean, say what you will about him defensively, but he's one of the top players in the game, I would say. Is he a super duper star? No, but he's a star. He's a really solid player. And you mentioned him. Malik Beasley's played really well. D'Angelo Russell, I know you don't like him, and maybe he's not the most entertaining player to watch, but he's not awful. He's not an awful player. And he could be a solid 3rd option on a decent team. I mean, that's a decent big 3 in quotation marks. So I think the big thing is just waiting for Cat to come back and then wait and see. And if he's like, I'm done with this crap, I want to be out, I want to get out of here, then go ahead, trade him. And then also you're going to trade D'Lo and you're probably going to trade Beasley. But it's hard to tell because he just hasn't played at all. And it's hard. I mean, you look at any team in the NBA, I feel like if you look at the Heat, for example, they lost Jimmy Butler and they were god awful. You take any team in the NBA, you take their best player out of the mix, they're going to be bad. and the Timberwolves were not a great team to begin with, and then you take their best player and they're going to be even worse. So I know you're like, let's just blow it up right now, but I'm more of the mindset of let's just wait and see a little bit. Let's have some patience. I know feels like the Minnesota Timberwolves have been like the next best team for the last like decade now. It's like, oh, just what they Wiggins and then they got Towns and here we go. And they made one playoff game and got swept by the Rockets 2 years ago. So, and they also got the first overall pick, who we haven't even mentioned while we're talking about the Wolves so far. That's Anthony Edwards. Oh, you did? I must have missed him. My point was not that you missed him, but because he's been pretty irrelevant so far. He has a few monster dunks, but he's averaging 13 points a game. But other than he showed some flashes, and he's a rookie, so I'm not going to tear him to shreds. But there was some concern going into this season about his commitment to basketball, how much he loves the game, and if he's not playing well, you do worry a little bit, at least, that maybe he's not going to be that into it. So, but he's got some potential. He was number 1 overall pick. I guess for a reason, but he was almost like he was the number 1 overall pick by default because there wasn't a stellar draft class, and he more so fit the one spot the Wolves didn't have was a small forward. Anthony Edwards. Yeah, and also talent too. Yeah, but if you're talking about strictly talent, I would argue Wiseman and Ball had more talent than Wiseman did out of the draft. But you already got Towns and D'Lo, and so that's why you couldn't get Ball or Wiseman. But yeah, and Jarrett Culver too. I mean, he's another top 5, top 6 pick only 2 years ago, and he's pretty much non-existent. And the rest of these guys, I mean, you make that big you acquire Ricky Rubio, everyone's like, oh yes, and he's barely played. He's coming off the bench, not really doing that much. I don't know. I would say it starts with the coaching. I don't think Ryan Saunders seems like a really nice guy. I think they need an adult in the room. I think they went because they had Tom Thibodeau, who was hard-nosed. Well, you see what he's doing with the Knicks, so maybe it wasn't Thibodeau's fault. Maybe it was the Wolves' fault, but he's like a hard-nosed, here we go. That approach didn't work. So then you go the complete opposite of the players coach, doesn't hold anybody accountable, in Ryan Saunders. They just got to find somebody right in the middle. And if they do that, I think this team could still be something with Cat. I would not trade Cat right now unless he's like, I'm done with Minnesota. I want to be done. That's the only time I would trade Cat. But I think it's hard to make a judgment here until we see Cat on the court because he's only played 4 games. And they were actually, if I remember correctly, kind of good in those 4 games that he played in. I think they won most of them. So that's at least my thing. That's at least my take. I know you might not agree with it.
Yeah, no, I think I mean I don't know if trading Cat's the right move. I can say I'm not sure if that is. That was just a bold take. I mean, he's worth a lot on the open market. Could obviously get a ton of assets, young assets, talent back for him. And I mean, this is something this team needs right now. I mean, deloading isn't the answer. Maybe Malik Beasley's been really good this year, I will say, but I don't know if he's no superstar. He's a good scorer. He doesn't do a whole lot else besides that. But we'll have to see. Time will tell. But I feel like this has been the Timberwolves motto the last 5 years. It's like, I'll wait till this, wait till that. I mean, we're done. I'm done waiting, man. I mean, that team's been bad for the. I mean, I feel like it's at some point you have to realize this clearly isn't working. But we can get to your next point now, man. You're fine.
I will say. So the one silver line for the Wolves being so bad is it seems like the Pistons and the Wolves are going to be, because they redid the lottery. So the top 3 teams have equal odds of getting the first overall pick, have the best odds of getting the first overall pick. And it seems like the Pistons, the Timberwolves, and are going to be the 2 teams are for sure going to be in there. And then you can make an argument, maybe the Wizards, they've won some games, so who knows, maybe the Mavericks. But I'm going to here's my bold prediction, because the NBA is rigged and they're going to find a way to screw the Pistons. So they're going to be by far the worst team in the league. They're going to get the 4th overall pick, let's just say. And then because they want the Warriors to be good, the NBA is going to make sure that the Wolves pick falls out of the top 3, even though they're going to be clearly the 2nd worst team in the NBA. And then the Warriors will have another top 5 pick, another superstar, and then the dynasty will continue. So that's my hot take, that even though they're both going to be terrible, the NBA is going to rig the draft. But that's a whole different episode for a different time. So we'll jump in to my next take, my final take. It's going to be an interesting debate. I'm interested to hear what you think about it. So with the All-Star returns, there's been a lot of conversation about positions as well as like MVP. And I feel like most of the articles, most of the things I've listened to, there's 3 clear-cut guys who are the MVP. One of them is LeBron. Obviously, he's good. I don't think we need to get into a huge debate about that. But I'm interested to hear your take on the other 2 guys who are getting a lot of buzz right now. They both play the same position. And the way I'm going to phrase this question is, who do you think is in the NBA, the all NBA teams, you only get one center per team. So who do you think is going to be the all NBA first team center? Do you think it's going to be Nikola Jokic or do you think it's going to be Joel Embiid? And I'll read off their stats real quick and then I'll get your take on it. So Jokic currently, as of recording, is averaging 26 points, 11 rebounds, 8 assists, almost 2 steals a game, and half a block a game. Shooting well, really across the board as well. Not shooting a ton of threes, but he's shooting almost 40% from three, which is really impressive. And then Joel Embiid is averaging 29 points, 10 rebounds, about 3 assists, about a steal and a half, and about a block and a half as well, along with decent percentages. He's actually shooting almost 43% from 3-point range, but is taking less than 3-point attempts than Jokic is. So I read the stats off for you there, Chris. Who do you think is better, Jokic or Embiid, at least right now as we record this episode?
I think I'm going to go with Joel Embiid for this one. I mean, it's obviously razor thin. It's a very debatable question, but I think Embiid has been playing at a different level this season. I mean, you look at his offensive scoring load, rebounding. I mean, they're both very similar to Jokic, but I think he makes the biggest difference on the defensive side of the ball. I think he's been absolutely incredible. Been part of the reason that the Philly has been so good at the defensive end of the ball. It's just I really think his all around. I mean, you could say the same thing about Embiid. Obviously, the better passer of the two of them, but I think Embiid's all around, two-way ability, being a really good defender, whereas Jokic, I think, is average at best on the defensive side of the ball. I really think that makes the big difference between me for the All NBA team, and I think the media is going to respect that as well, personally.
Here we go. I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going Nikola Jokic. That's why I got the jersey on. Maybe it's me just being biased because Jokic is one of my favorite players in the league, but I'm banked. So I know I said right now. Embiid, he just worries me a little bit with the injury, so maybe I'm getting a little bit biased by that. But I think with Jokic, I think that even though the Sixers are, in terms of record, a better team, I just think the Nuggets are a better team overall. I know they got off to a slow start, but they've been coming on as of late. Won 7 of their last 10. They got MPJ back, and I value the fact that his assist numbers are crazy too. In terms of Jokic, he's averaging, like I said, I think 6 more assists per game than Embiid is. So I feel like all around he's a good playmaker, and their blocks and steals numbers are pretty comparable. Defensively, I feel like Jokic, he's not a great defender, but he's not awful. He's still a decent rim protector, and I think even though Embiid is clearly the better rim protector, I just like Jokic, and he went off a couple nights ago, had a monster game. Maybe it's just recency bias, and I'm just going with Jokic because he's looked better. I think as of late, even though Embiid's looked really good too. It's really close, but ultimately, I like Jokic just a little bit more.
I mean, that's fair. Like I said, I think it's very debatable. But as of right now, the Sixers have been a better team, in my opinion. Yeah. I think Embiid has had more of those games where I'm just like, wow, he's just willing his team to victory. I mean, he does it on both ends of the floor. He's one of the best rim protectors in the league, and he's been incredible on the offensive end of the ball too. I mean, I really have just liked the way he's played this year. I mean, I've criticized him in the past. He's kind of reminded me of like the Andre Drummond from the Pistons type, where he only brings it when he wants to, rather than bringing it on every night. This year, he's bringing it every time on the floor, and the stats show his stats are up in every single category. He's brought both an offensive and defensive intensity. He's giving out a lot more effort, in my opinion. I think he's just been fantastic this year, and obviously, no discredit to Jokic, what he's done this year. He's a great player. Their team, they have picked it up a lot. They're still, in my opinion, the worst of those two teams. I know you may disagree a little bit, but I think he's been great. But I don't think he's that great of a defender. I think that limits what they do on the defensive side of the ball, with having their two best players being in average to below average defenders, and him and Jamal Murray, either one of them being real great on the defensive end of the ball.
Yeah, Jokic though. I mean, you made the argument that Embiid, he's finally like, this is his first time. You see, he's like fully committed. I mean, you could say the same thing for Jokic too. I mean, his stats across the board are career highs. I'm looking right now, career highs in rebounds, career high in assists, career high in points, career highs in everything. So they're very similar. It's going to be really fun to watch. I think. Maybe I agree with you. Right now, I think Embiid probably has the slight edge in terms of MVP. I think LeBron might be the MVP. I don't know. That's a whole different debate for a different time. But I think when you're just looking at these two guys, I think Embiid has the slight edge over Jokic. But I think by the end of the season, I think it'll be Jokic, just because I feel like Embiid, maybe he starts resting a little bit as they get closer to the playoffs, and maybe Philadelphia comes down a little bit from their hot start, regresses a little bit, and while Denver regresses a little bit more to the positive side, gets a little bit more towards their full potential after the weak start. So, yeah, but I thought that was an interesting debate to have. I saw a lot of other people having it. It really sucks that there's only one All NBA center spot, because both these guys are clear. Like I said, they're the two of the top three players in the NBA this season, and one of them is going to be on the All NBA second team, which is still a huge honor, but it's going to be kind of a bummer because they're both clearly deserving of an All NBA first team spot. But I thought that was an interesting game, interesting question to ask. But I'll let you dive in here to, I believe, your final point of the episode.
Yeah. Yeah, so my final point, I want to talk about some of the more under the radar young players that have made drastic leaps. You know, these are guys, you know, it's not, I wrote down a couple non-examples, but like, you know, guys that have blossomed as stars like a Jaylen Brown, a Colin Sexton, a De'Aaron Fox, all guys that have taken massive leaps this season, in my opinion. But I want to talk about some of the guys that aren't getting as much credit. You know, and the first one, I'll just going to run through them pretty quick. Kobe White, you know, he's been, in my opinion, a lot better, and that may be to do with a little bit more playing time for him because he didn't really start last season. He's gotten in the starting lineup, but he's averaging 15, basically 5 and 5, shooting not the greatest from the floor, but in my opinion, playing a little bit better defensively as well. I think he's having a really good season so far this year. The next guy is Gary Trent Jr., and I think this one is extremely interesting. He's been a big part of why the Blazers are still afloat right now. He's been fantastic since he entered the starting lineup. He's averaging 13, 1, and 2, but he's shooting 30 or 45% from the 3-point line and been playing some incredible defense. Also, does not turn the ball over either, which is incredible. He averages only 0.6 turnovers per game, which is, I mean, I thought that was insane how low that was. And he's getting big minutes now, so I mean, it should definitely be higher than that in my opinion. But I think he's been extremely interesting so far this season. A guy that is playing in a contract year, a little bit older than the rest of the guys on my list, but really interesting stuff from him. And another guy is Mikal Bridges. I mean, 14, 2, 5, and I mean, he's shooting well from 3 at 38%. And obviously is a fantastic wing defender, one of the best in the league. Just a total package of a player that you want on your team that's not a superstar, but a guy that really, I would say, holds his team together in terms of what he can do on both ends of the floor. The next guy I want to talk about who's currently hurt right now but had a great year so far is DeAndre Hunter, and he's averaging 17 a game. Another big step for him, 17 and 5, shooting 51% from the floor. Obviously, we know what he did at Virginia. A really good defender, has been incredible on the offensive end this year as well, with the over 50% field goal percentage. The last guy I would like to bring up, and then you can talk about whatever you want to talk about with these guys. The last guy is Keldon Johnson, and this is a guy who plays for the Spurs, you know, one of the, I would say, the more gross teams in the league for people that don't watch League Pass because they are actually really fun to watch. But he's averaging 14, 7, and 2 as well, playing some pretty good defense, but incredibly good on the rebounding side of the ball. I know you brought up DeJounte Murray earlier, who's also a great rebounder for a guard. Keldon Johnson, a little bit bigger, but he's been one of the best small forwards in terms of rebounding the ball on both sides of the ball. Plays with a lot of energy. A guy that I find myself enjoying watching a lot. But any of these guys you want to talk about, just 5 under the radar guys. You don't have to talk about any of them. You can bring up a guy that maybe you think I missed. It doesn't matter. Go. I'll leave the floor to you now.
No, I mean, I think those are all really good. I mean, if I sat down and thought about it, maybe I think of a few more, but I think you hit most of the big name guys, or the big name guys that are getting in this underrated player conversation. Yeah, Keldon Johnson, he's still a young player, so he does have some lapses occasionally, because I've been watching some Spurs games where he makes some just decisions where you're like, huh? But that's expected to be a young player. The upside is definitely there. It's a guy we didn't really talk about. The young Spurs, man. I mean, I know they're quote unquote big name guys are Aldridge and DeRozan right now, but beginning of the season, I know I mentioned it at the top of the show, when we talked about the Spurs, we're like, oh, once they trade those guys, they're going to be awful. They got some really interesting young talent, and Keldon's one of those guys. Kobe White, I'm not going to talk about too much about him because we did, in our preview episodes, we did talk about how he had the definite upside to get better, and he has improved. I think the young Bulls, they're going to be an interesting team. I don't know if Levine is going to be able to be the best guy on a good team,
Yeah.
However, if they get like a superstar, Chicago's a decent market. Obviously, you have the Michael Jordan connection there. They're a big market for basketball. If they get like a superstar type of guy to join that core group of Markkanen, Kobe White, Levine, Patrick Williams, Wendell Carter, they're going to be a really interesting team to watch. And a big reason for that is Kobe White's taking that next step this year because he, I believe last year leading up to the shutdown, like his last 5 or 6 games, he was really good.
Really good,
Nice to see he's been able to carry that into this season. And then DeAndre Hunter, too, guy very similar ilk to Jarrett Culver that we just talked about with Minnesota, a guy that we just were kind of written off. Okay, he was a bust, wasn't a good pick. He's really proved them wrong. Even if things don't work out with John Collins in Atlanta, it's nice to see that they're still going to have a nice front court piece in DeAndre Hunter because it seems the Collins stuff has died down a little bit, but it seems like he's not entirely happy in Atlanta. So it wouldn't surprise me if he gets traded. And then you said Mikal Bridges. I think we talked about him last week too. Maybe not. But he's a good player. Again, a big reason why the Suns are super good. Chris Paul is not going to play forever, but they're going to have a really nice pieces there with Booker, Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton here for years to come. It's really great time to be a Phoenix Suns fan. And the last one that I want to talk about the most was Gary Trent Jr. because he was really good in the bubble last year. I think we did kind of call it a little bit in the preview episode. We did talk about how he was going to be a good player again. And I think I want to hear your take on this. It's a little bit of a question. I think this makes CJ McCollum gasp expendable. I think maybe, I know he's injured right now, but if you can have Gary Trent Jr. as your shooting guard, maybe you trade CJ McCollum for something else that they could need, right? Maybe a small forward guy. I think Gary Trent Jr. could play small forward, but yeah, you could trade CJ McCollum for a big. If you're kind of like Nurkic, you just get hurt too much. I think, is Nurkic a free agent after this year? I don't know for sure.
I don't believe so. I think he may have one more year left.
So maybe get just a big guy, a power forward, a center, a stretch guy. Who knows? I don't really know. A ton of those guys are out. Karl Anthony Towns, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if there's a ton of those guys on the market that would be better than CJ, but I think I'm interested to hear your thoughts. If Gary Trent Jr., I don't think this is a flash in the pan because he was really good in the bubble too. And he's been able to carry, similar to Kobe White, been able to carry this over into this season. So I think he's actually just a quality player. And maybe it's time to move on from CJ and get another piece that maybe helps you. Maybe Bradley Beal. Who knows? I don't know. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. Yeah, no, I do agree with you. I mean, while CJ McCollum's obviously a better player than Gary Trent, this isn't a hot take, but, Trent has shown his own. I mean, he's been fantastic. He's been able to create his own shot. He's been absolutely splashing from three, and he's been a perfect guy to pair with Dame in the backcourt. And obviously, I watch with a lot more intent because it's one of my favorite teams. And they're actually playing right now against the New York Knicks, which we'll have to see. McCollum's still out. We'll see if Trent can continue his fantastic run of games. And yeah, he was great in the bubble. He showed flashes last year. He's a young player that didn't really get a chance first year or two in the league, but he's starting to finally. He cracked the rotation. Now he's cracked the starting lineup, and he's just been even better. I know like I said, he's only 13, 1-2. It's not insane numbers if you look at it from the outside, but if you watch him play games, he's a hard-nosed defender. I feel like he's been a lot more active on the defensive side of the ball since entering the starting rotation. And obviously he's been splashing from three. I mean, he's shooting 45% from beyond the arc, and it's been fantastic. And yeah, I mean, if the right trade arises, I would be. I mean, I like McCollum. There's times where I don't. At the same time, he's a good player.
He was really good this year before the injury. He would have been an all-star. He would have been an all-star.
He's still like potentially.
Yeah, he still could be. Yeah, he's still not.
He's on the voting, but he's been a great player throughout his career offensively. I've always been kind of worried about the two guard system not really working because both him and Dame aren't the best defenders. They're both kind of undersized, both ball dominant. Not similar play styles, but at the same time, they do similar things on the court. So always been worried about that being able to take a team to the Blazers to the next level. But I feel like a guy like Trent maybe fits the system a little more if you're able to trade a McCollum for some kind of star of some sort. Maybe him and Nurkic for Karl Anthony Towns would be an absolutely incredible trade for the Blazers, and watching Cat and Dame run the pick and roll all the time would be fantastic to watch because they're two of the best offensive players in the league, but it's more of a pipe dream. Probably not something that will ever happen, but you never know. I mean, the T-Wolves, I think they're terrible, so they need to do something and potentially be a landing spot for him if this is Trent isn't a contract year, so they have to figure out what they're going to do with him. I
Yeah.
assume they re-sign him at all costs, and I don't think he'll be an insanely expensive piece, but very, very
Yeah.
interesting.
It's just nice because it gives them options, right? You can trade Trent Jr., you can trade McCollum, or you can just keep both guys and just see what happens. I think they do need to make some sort of move just because it feels like they're just kind of running the same thing back. Playoff team that maybe wins a playoff series or two, and that's really it. Sorry, I know you're a Blazers fan, but I think that's just how this team is, and I think that you need to do something to shake things up at least a little bit. But I like how you mentioned it, because that's something I was also going to say to kind of conclude this point is CJ is a better player than Gary Trent Jr., but I think Gary Trent Jr. is a better fit with Lillard, at least in my opinion, right? He has that shooting, plus he has the defense that Lillard doesn't have. And I think he might be a better fit, like you said, which maybe makes a little more sense to get off CJ than it would to Gary Trent. But it's not a great time to be a Blazers fan because everyone's hurt right now, but it is a nice time. It's not as bad of a time as maybe some other fan bases where you can there's a lot of avenues you could go here where you can make some moves, or even maybe not make some moves, just have CJ come back, and you could still be a really solid team, because I think they're solid right now anyway, even without CJ. They're still a top 5 team in the West, right? Or they're sixth. They're sixth right now, 12-9. But they're actually tied for 4th with the Nuggets and the Suns. So they're right there. Once CJ comes back, they're going to be a solid team. But I would really love for them to make a move here, get off one of those two guys, and get a big guy, just get another impact player that can maybe really help this team, as you said, reach the next level. Because I think with Dame, he's one of the top talents in the league, and I think it'd be really cool to see him make an NBA Finals. That would be really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, my opinions on that. I love the Blazers, but I mean, with their current roster, it might not be true, but really wanted to highlight how good Gary Trent's been since entering the starting lineup. Not just that, since the bubble, really, he's been fantastic in my opinion. I mean, he's been coming off the bench, now finally inserted in the starting lineup. One of those guys that I feel like you can kind of put him in any role he's going to thrive in. I mean, he was great off the bench. Stats didn't back it up quite as much. Now he's been averaging basically 20 a game since they entered the starting lineup. So really impressive to see from him. A player that I've always I liked him in college at Duke. I've really liked him in the NBA so far. I think he's a great fit for this team. And, this isn't just a Gary Trent podcast. All these guys have shown major flashes.
Yep.
Year 2. Most of the other guys are year 2 guys. They've shown major improvements and haven't been as noticed as much. So I wanted to touch up on all those things.
Yeah, Bridges and Hunter too have really stood out to me. Kobe White, maybe because I expected it, that it's not as surprising. But yeah, he's still been really good. And then Keldon Johnson too. That's been a big surprise. That's a guy that I really didn't even know about, if I'm being honest, before the season started. So he's been really solid. But do you have anything else to add here before we wrap this episode up?
No, this was a good episode for sure. Definitely interesting all-star talk. A lot of young players we addressed, a lot of struggling teams, even some MVP consideration. We got to everything today.
Yeah.
I mean,
especially
biggest takeaway is that the T-Wolves suck. That's the biggest takeaway of today.
Yeah, that might not be the most attention-grabbing headline for our viewers to grab onto, but yeah, we for all those Timberwolves fans out there, we got you covered. So, but once again, we are the Zone Defense Podcast. I did want to mention real quick before we end, thank you again for all of our viewers, all our clicks. We've got a lot of great viewership on the channel here these last few weeks, so we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Again, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't already. Follow us on Spotify and Twitter at Zone Defense Pod. And search us on Apple Podcast. Smash the like button and also drop a comment down below. Let us know your thoughts on the Timberwolves, maybe some other underrated NBA players that we missed when Chris broke them down. Your thoughts, is Jokic or Embiid better? And even just your thoughts on the All-Star game and whether you think who you think should get in and should be left off. And also, do you think there should be an All-Star game this year? We'd love to read those comments. We try to respond to all of them as best as we can. But again, we appreciate everything. And thank you for listening to this episode. And we'll see you next time.
Peace.